Okay, I'm continuing with Holy Grail of Wisdom quotes by Meepy Rogers, Thomas Pynchon, in alphabetical order. He's still alive, born in 1937. This is his best quote, and this is an all-time great quote. He says, if they can get you asking the wrong questions, then they don't have to worry about the answers. And that's what I see with most people. They don't even know the question. Like a patient has cancer, and they're just like, well, should I have chemotherapy or radiation therapy? They never ask themselves, is there another alternative than chemotherapy or radiation therapy or open surgery? Sometimes those are the best choice, but a lot of times there's other things to consider. All right, that's a topic for another day. Next quote by Thomas Pynchon. Time is never wasted if you remember to bring along something to read. The general public has been divided into two parts, those who think science can do anything and those who are afraid it will. What most people don't understand about science is most of it is fake. Most of what you hear about, this is the scientific perspective or scientific discovery. Just like for cancer, you'll always hear that, cancer is caused by DNA mutation. It'll say that in the medical textbooks, but that is not true at all. The Genome Atlas project showed that they couldn't find a consistent pattern of mutation in cancer. The DNA theory, somatic mutation theory, is also called the DNA theory of cancer, and the evidence does not support it. The evidence is far, far stronger for the metabolic theory of cancer, going back to the Warburg effect and all that stuff, like the reverse Warburg effect, the Lisanti, and all that. Okay, the next quote. To have humanism, we must first be convinced of our humanity, and as we move further into decadence, this becomes more difficult. Basically, you have to have the Bible. Man is created in the image of God, therefore part divine. You have to have that. If you don't have that, then you don't have a moral foundation. And basically what you're saying is the ruler becomes equivalent of God, and they can do whatever they want. Okay, Pyrrhus. He lived from 319 to 272 BC. This is from the term the Pyrrhic victory, because they had high losses with their victory. And he said, if we have one more victory like that, we are lost. A Pyrrhic victory, something that's not worth the effort. Okay, a little bit about Pythagoras, one of the ancient Greek philosophers, really from a long time ago, before the Persian War. Pythagoras lived from 571 to 495 BC. Here's a quote by Greg Aldrete, the history professor. He said, Pythagoras was a second-generation Ionian philosopher. He used to dress like a wizard. Yeah, and he's sort of like what Pythagoras is, the ancient Greeks, is like what Merlin the magician is to England. He was real good at math and a real proponent of math. He's famous for the Pythagorean theorem. Everybody learns that in geometry. Euclid was also a Greek, much later, but Euclid was a Greek who made Euclid's textbook of geometry. Pythagoras, quote, there is a geometry in the humming of strings, and he figured out the distances apart on a string instrument for the different musical octaves. And he said God built the universe on numbers, and he had this idea of proportions that were used by Greek artists to draw the human body. And Plato, the subsequent philosopher, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, Plato was very much inspired by Pythagoras, and that had a big influence on his writings. And the Greeks were the first people of Western civilization. And tremendous amount comes from them. I'm currently reading a book called The Dream of Reason by Anthony Gottlieb, where he goes into all this detail about what each one of these ancient Greek philosophers wrote and said. And at first I thought the book was kind of stupid, because a lot of stuff they said was kind of silly. They didn't really know what they're talking about. But you can see the mind of the Greeks kept building towards better and better reason. Finally Aristotle summarized, logic, but it's rather interesting after a while hearing how they all thought, the different theories of atoms, and all these words come from ancient Greek schools of philosophy: Epicureanism, empiricism, the skeptics, the cynics, the Stoics. Okay, next quote by Pythagoras. Every man has been made by God in order to acquire knowledge and to contemplate. So these Greeks were very intellectual. Pythagoras believed in reincarnation, so that's why he became a vegetarian. He didn't want to eat an animal that might be a person reincarnated as an animal. So the vegetarian diet for over 1,000 years was called the Pythagorean diet. Pythagoras, it is better to be silent than to dispute with the ignorant. Some are slaves of ambition or money, but others are interested in understanding life itself, and these are called philosophers. And they value contemplation and discovery of nature beyond all other pursuits. Yeah, it's amazing how many philosophers there were in Greek. In part that's because they had an aristocracy, okay? Like in Athens. And Athens was the leading intellectual culture in Greece. But they're quite extraordinary. The pre-Socratics, then the Socratic school of philosophers, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, and then there were other philosophers that followed them, okay? But the whole thing, there's tons and tons of ongoing philosophy and argument and debate in the ancient Greeks. Let's see what else they say here. Just one last quote by Pythagoras. Know thyself and thou wilt know the universe. Okay, hope you found that helpful.